The night the concordance came for my son, I learned something about the Alpha of Kellam Deep that nobody in the galaxy knew. He was afraid of exactly one thing. And it wasn't dying. Let me back up. You need to understand where I was standing before you'll understand why my hands shook the way they did. My name is Nell Ashgrove. I'm human. I was born on a rock called Tamsin Verd, third moon out from a dying orange sun, and if you've never heard of it, that's fine, nobody has. It's the kind of place that shows up on star charts as a number and a warning about the dust. I cleaned floors for a living. Not metaphorically, actual floors, actual dirt. The Ringcow call it Veshtara, hearth-keeping, and they say it like it's holy, but I'll tell you the truth, it's still mopping. It's still going down on your knees at 0400 and scrubbing ash out of grout, while the recyclers hum and everyone else in the hold is asleep. I worked in the Alpha's house. Not a house, really. Kellam Deep is a fortress hold carved into the belly of an iron moon, 9 kilometers of tunnel and hall and hangar bored straight through rock so old it predates the light that finds it. The Ringcow have held that moon for 400 years. They don't build up. They build in. They like weight over their heads. They like the feeling of a mountain sitting on their shoulders. The Great Hall alone could have swallowed a colony ship. Black basalt walls polished so smooth you could see your face in them, veined through with cooling filaments that glowed a dull amber when the reactors were running hot. Overhead, the ceiling wasn't a ceiling at all. It was a lattice of forge arms and cargo rails, and hanging chains as thick as my waist, all of it moving always, so the whole place had this sound. This heartbeat. A low industrial thud you stopped hearing after about a week and then couldn't sleep without ever again. I lived in the servant tier, level 6, small room, a cot, a chem shower, a heat plate, and one narrow viewport that looked out on the black. And Tam was 7. My husband died in the number 4 bore when Tam was 2. I don't tell that story much, there's nothing in it. A support pylon failed, the shaft came down, and 41 people who went to work that morning didn't come home. Haddon was one of them. He was 34. He had bad knees and a stupid laugh, and he used to hum when he ate, which drove me insane. And now I'd trade every year I've got left for one more meal with a man humming at me across a table. The Ringcow don't do widows' pensions. That's not cruelty, it's just not a concept they have. Their clan absorbs its own. You lose a mate, the pack takes you. But I wasn't pack. I was a human contractor on a 5-year labor visa, and when Haddon died, the contract died with him, and I had 11 days to find work or get shipped back out to a moon where the mines were already closed. So I went to the hold and I asked for a job. That's the whole story of how I ended up cleaning the Alpha's floors. It's not romantic. It's not brave. I was terrified, and I had a 2-year-old on my hip, and I stood in that hall with my chin up and lied through my teeth about my qualifications. And the house steward, an old female named Asa, gray around the muzzle, eyes like wet stones, looked at me for a long, long moment. Then she said, "You will not last a season." And I said, "Then you'll only be out 1 season's wage." 5 years later, I was still there. Asa never mentioned it again, but every year on the anniversary of that day, she'd leave a jar of grain honey outside my door. No note. She'd have bitten her own hand off before admitting it was her. That's Ringcow for you. They'd die before saying they liked you. They'd also die for you, and never mention that either. Now the Alpha. Sargon Vess. You've probably heard the name even if you don't know you have. In the outer braid they call him the Iron Throat. In Concordance dispatches he's listed under a designation, not a name, because the Concordance doesn't dignify warlords with names. There's a bounty on him in 4 systems and a statue of him in 1. He is enormous. Ringcow run big, but Sargon ran big even for them. 2.5 meters standing straight, which he rarely did indoors because he'd crack his skull on the lintels. Charcoal dark, silver coming in at the throat and shoulders. 1 ear gone at the tip, taken by a plasma lance at the siege of Bellum Reach when he was 19 years old and stupid. He had a voice like something being dragged across gravel. And he did not look at servants. I want to be precise about that because I think people misunderstand. It wasn't contempt. Sargon Vess wasn't cruel to me. He never raised a hand, never raised his voice, never once made me feel small on purpose. He just didn't see me. I was furniture. I was the thing that made the floor clean. For 4.5 years I worked in rooms he walked through, and I could count on one hand the times our eyes met, and every one of those was an accident. I was fine with that, honestly. Being invisible in a warlord's house is the safest thing you can be. Or so I thought. Here's the part I have to explain, and it's the part everyone gets wrong. Tam was born wrong. That's the Ringcow phrasing and I hate it, but it's also, look, it's not inaccurate. He had a condition. Human doctors would have called it a myelin disorder degenerative, a name with 11 syllables that I learned to pronounce perfectly by the time he was 3 and have never once said out loud since. The short version, his nerves didn't insulate right. Signals leaked. His legs went first. By 7, Tam couldn't walk more than a few steps without the braces. The braces were mine. I built them. I want that on the record, because later on there were a lot of stories about where those braces came from, and most of them are garbage. I built them out of salvage. Out of a decommissioned loader exoskeleton I pulled from the scrap bay in Hangar 9, and 11 months of nights I'm not getting back. Ringcow servo actuators, human-scale rework, and a control lattice I cannibalized from a mining drone's balance rig. Every night after my shift, 4 hours, sometimes 5, hunched over a bench with a magnifier strapped to my head, and my hands cramping so bad I'd have to run them under hot water before I could uncurl my fingers. The first version threw him into a wall. The 4th version let him stand. The 7th version, the one he was wearing when all this happened, let my son walk down a corridor holding my hand. They looked awful, I'll be honest. 2 dull gray struts running the length of each leg, hinged at knee and ankle, with a strap harness at the hips and a little control puck at the small of his back that hummed when it was working and whined when it wasn't. Nothing pretty about them. They squeaked. Tam loved them. He named them, called them Bones, as in Ma, Bones is squeaking again. As in Ma, can Bones come to the hangar? He was 7 and he had a machine strapped to his legs, and he named it and thought it was funny. That was Tam. Kids adapt. Everyone says that and it's true, but nobody tells you what it costs. Tam adapted to Kellum deep the way water adapts to a crack. He got in everywhere. By 6, he knew the vent runs better than the maintenance crews. He knew which hall guards would slip him a ration bar and which ones would report him. He knew that the 3rd-tier gantry rail vibrated at a specific frequency when the forge arm cycled, and he'd sit there with his hand flat on the metal and tell me the reactor was running, grumpy today. The Ringcow pups didn't play with him. Couldn't really. They roughhouse. It's how they talk. A Ringcow pup at 7 can put a grown human through a bulkhead by accident and feel genuinely awful about it afterward, and Tam and his braces would have broken like a dry stick. So Tam played with the machines. He'd sit in the corner of the forge floor for hours, out of the way, watching the loader arms swing. He learned their sequences. He'd call them out under his breath before they moved. Left, left, drop, turn. He was never wrong. One day an old smith named Vurek, hands like slabs, one eye milky, noticed the human kid mumbling. He watched him for a while. Then he came over, crouched down until his knees cracked like gunfire and said, "You know the rhythm." Tam said, "It's the same as a song." Vurek stared at him. Then he went back to work, and the next day there was a stool in that corner, just a stool. Nobody mentioned it. Nobody ever mentions anything in that place. But the stool was there every day for the next 2 years, and if anyone moved it, it was back by morning. That's the hold. That's what I'm trying to make you understand. They'd never say they'd taken to him. They just built him a chair. Sargon Vess met my son on a Tuesday. Well, the ring cow don't have Tuesdays, but it was a Tuesday to me, and I've never stopped thinking of it that way. I was cleaning the war table room. Big circular chamber off the great hall, hollow plinth in the center, all of it dark because there wasn't a war on. I had my back to the door and my hands in a bucket, and I was thinking about absolutely nothing. And I heard Tam laugh. Not a scared laugh, not a hurt laugh. A mother knows the difference in about 4 milliseconds, and I promise you the sound of a hurt laugh does something to your bloodstream that never fully drains out. This was a real one, delighted. I came around the plinth so fast, I kicked the bucket over. And there was my son, standing in the middle of the war table room in his squeaking braces, with his hand flat on the side of the alpha's leg. Just resting there, like you'd lean on a wall. Sargon Vess was standing dead still, ears flat, not angry flat, the other flat, the one I'd never seen on him. And Tam, 7 years old, looked up about 1.5 miles and said, "You're warm." I heard my own heartbeat in my ears. I said his name. I don't think it came out as sound. Sargon looked at me. And for the first time in 4.5 years, the Alpha of Kellam Deep actually saw me. He looked at me for about 2 seconds. Then he looked back down at the small human hand on his leg, and he said, in that gravel voice without moving, "He is not afraid." I said, "He's 7. He's not afraid of anything." And Sargon Vess said, very quietly, "Everyone is afraid of me." I don't know what came over me. Fatigue, maybe, 5 years of being furniture. I said, "Then you should meet more 7-year-olds." There was a silence in that room you could have weighed on a scale. And then the Alpha of Kellam Deep made a sound in his chest, low, short, almost nothing. He was laughing. After that, things changed, slowly, in ways I didn't notice for weeks and couldn't stop once I did. Tam started turning up places. The forge floor, yes, but also the gantry above the hangar where the crews launched from, the armory annex. Once, horrifyingly, the training pit, where I found him sitting on the rim with his braces dangling over a 12-meter drop, watching 200 kilos of ring cow warrior throw each other into sand. And every single time someone had put him there. Not let him, put him. Carried him up, set him down somewhere safe, never said a word to me about it. I asked Vurek once, straight out, "Who's bringing my son to the gantry?" The old smith didn't look up from his work. He said, "Pup goes where he wants. He can't climb a ladder." Then he did not climb one. That was the whole conversation. And Sargon started, I don't know how to say this without it sounding like something it wasn't. Not then, not yet. Sargon started slowing down. He'd come through the great hall on his way to somewhere important, 12 people trailing him, and he'd pass the corner where Tam sat on his stool, and his pace would drop by a fraction of a second. Just a fraction, long enough for his hand to come down and touch the top of my son's head. 2 fingers, barely contact. Then he'd keep walking and never break stride, and the 12 people behind him would flow past like water around a rock. Nobody commented. Ring cow don't comment. But I saw the way the hall went quiet for that half second, every time. I want to tell you about one night specifically, because it matters later. Tam's braces failed. Left knee actuator, catastrophic. It happened on the 3rd-tier walkway at maybe 2200 hours, which is basically the dead of night in a hold that runs on shift cycles. He went down hard on the grating, split his lip, cracked the housing, and the servo locked so his leg wouldn't bend, which meant he couldn't get up, which meant my son was lying on a metal walkway in the dark, alone, 2 levels from anyone. He was on that walkway for about 90 seconds. That's what the log said afterward, 90 seconds. Because Sargon Vess came off the command tier at a dead sprint. I don't know how he knew, I've never known. There's no sensor on that walkway, there's no alarm. The Ringcal have a hearing range that would embarrass a human audiologist, but the command tier is 2 levels up and behind a blast door, and I've done the math 100 times and it doesn't work. He was just there, in 90 seconds, from 2 levels away through a blast door at a sprint. I got there 4 minutes later because a runner came to fetch me, and I ran the whole way with my heart trying to climb out through my teeth. And I came around the corner onto that walkway and I stopped. Sargon Vess was sitting on the grating. Sitting on the floor, with his back against the rail and his legs out in front of him like a man on a park bench, which is not a thing that alphas do, which is not a thing I have ever seen one of them do in public in my life. And my son was in his lap with his face in the fur of the alpha's chest, crying the ugly, exhausted cry of a kid who's been holding it together too long. And Sargon had one hand, one enormous hand that had killed more people than I've met, cupped around the back of Tam's head. And he was talking. Low, almost inaudible. I couldn't catch the words at first, and then I did, and it wasn't comfort. It wasn't there. He was saying, "You will stand up, not now, later, not tonight, later, but you will stand up." Over and over, like a promise, like an oath. And Tam was hiccuping into his chest and nodding. Sargon looked up and saw me. We didn't say anything. He handed me my son, careful, like a man handing over something that could break, which, well. He stood, he straightened his coat. He looked down at the cracked brace, housing for a second. Then he said, "The knee." I said, "The actuator, I can fix it." "How long?" 3 days, I have to fabricate though. "You will have it by morning." And he walked away. I had it by morning. Not a fixed one, a new one, machined out of the same alloy they use in warship gimbals, tolerances tighter than anything I could have cut on a scrap bench in 6 months. It was sitting outside my door in a plain crate with no note. Vurek's work had to be. That old Smith had been up all night. But nobody ordered Vurek to do anything. Nobody in that hold has ever ordered Vurek to do anything and lived. Except one person. Okay, now I have to tell you about the concordance. If you're from the Corps, you probably think the concordance is a good thing. Peace standards, shipping lanes, the whole clean, bright machine of it, and out there. Sure, maybe, I don't know, I've never been to the Corps. Out here on the braid, the concordance is a fleet and a form. The form is called a levy instrument. It's how they annex you. They don't invade. Invading is expensive and it looks bad in the feeds. Instead, they file paper. A levy instrument declares a holding non-compliant on some technicality and assesses a debt. And when you can't pay the debt, they take the holding as collateral, and it's all completely legal, and there are 400 pages of it, and every page is true. They'd been filing against Kellam Deep for 11 years. Never stuck. The Ringcal have lawyers too, which surprises people, and they're vicious. But in the spring of that year, something changed. A clause. Concordance statute, subsection something something. I'm not a lawyer and I'm not going to pretend. The gist was this. A concordant citizen residing in a non-compliant holding is presumed to be held under duress and may be recovered by force. I'm a concordant citizen, technically, by birth, on a moon that got absorbed into the concordance while I was 8 years old and playing in a drainage ditch. Tam is a concordant citizen, same paperwork. Do you see it? They didn't need to invade Kellam Deep. They just needed to come get me. Because the second a concordance boarding party sets foot in a hold to recover a citizen, and that hold resists, that's an act of war against the concordance. That's not a legal dispute anymore. That's a casus belli, that's fleets. And if the hold doesn't resist, then the Alpha of Kellam Deep let the concordance walk into his house and take what was his and walk back out, and every clan on the braid sees it, and Sargon Vess is finished. Not dead. Worse. Finished. Nobody follows an alpha who bends. It was a beautiful trap. I want to be fair to them. It was genuinely, elegantly beautiful. And it was built out of me and a 7-year-old. They came on a Tuesday, too. I've thought about that a lot. The alarm didn't sound like an alarm. That's the first thing. Kellam Deep doesn't do klaxons. When something goes wrong, the reactor filaments in the walls change color. That's it. The whole hold, 9 kilometers of it, goes from amber to a deep arterial red. And you feel it in your gut before your brain catches up because the light changes, and suddenly you can't see properly, and everything looks like it's bleeding. I was in the servant tier, 6th level, folding linens if you can believe it. The walls went red. I dropped everything and ran. I want to be honest about the next 30 seconds because I've heard the versions people tell, and in every one of them I'm brave. I wasn't. I was so scared I was making noise. Not screaming, this awful low with every step like a dog. I couldn't stop it. Because I knew where Tam was. He was on the forge floor, on his stool, in the corner. And the forge floor is level 2, right off the main hangar, which is where you'd land if you were coming to take somebody. 6 of them. They came down the hangar ramp in Concordance boarding kit, and I'll tell you what that looks like because you should know. You don't see a person. That's the design. Full cycle powered plate, matte white, seamless, no visor, no face, just a smooth sensor band where a head should be. It makes them look like something poured rather than built. The plates ride on their own micro servos so the whole suit flows when they move, no clatter, no clank, just this awful liquid silence. And in the middle of them, one man in a suit. An actual suit, fabric gray, he was human, late 50s, silver at the temples, very tidy. He was carrying a slate, and he had reading glasses pushed up on his forehead, which I remember because who wears reading glasses in the year we're in? He looked like an accountant. He was an accountant, that's the whole point, that's the joke, they didn't send a general. His name was Adjutant Marrow, and he was there to file paperwork. The forge floor had gone dead quiet. 40 ring cal on that floor. Smiths, riggers, loaders, big people, angry people. Every single one of them had stopped working and turned, and they were standing there in the red light with their tools still in their hands, and nobody was moving. Because they all knew what the trap was. The first one of them to lay a hand on a Concordance officer starts a war their clan cannot win. Verek was standing in front of my son's stool. Old bastard, one eye, hands like slabs. He'd put himself between 6 powered plate soldiers and a 7-year-old human boy, and he was holding a shaping hammer and he was not moving, and I could see from across the floor that his whole arm was shaking with the effort of not swinging it. I came out of the access stair, and I saw all of this in about 1 second. And then Adjutant Marrow said pleasantly, "Ah, Ms. Ashgrove." He knew my name. He'd read my file on the ship, on the way over probably twice. He said, "I'm so sorry to do this in front of everyone. Would you like to sit? This won't take long." I want to walk you through what he actually said, because it's important that you understand nobody threatened me. Not once. Not a single time. He said the Concordance had reviewed my residency status. He said that as a citizen residing in a Category 3 non-compliant holding, I was presumed to be under duress. He said the presumption was rebuttable. He said, and here's where my stomach fell out of my body, that a minor citizen could not rebut the presumption. Minors lack legal capacity. Therefore, regardless of my choice, the minor was to be recovered and transported to a Concordance welfare facility for assessment. He said I was welcome to accompany him. He said, and I remember this word for word, "It really is the best outcome available, Ms. Ashgrove. The facility has excellent pediatric neurology, better than anything on this rock. I've seen his medical file." Those braces are, and here he smiled, kindly, genuinely, remarkable, honestly. But they're a stopgap. He needs a hospital, not a forge. And that's the thing. That's the thing that still keeps me awake. He was right. I said, he's not going anywhere without me. Marrow said, of course. That's why I said you're welcome to accompany him. I said, then we go together, both of us now. And Marrow's smile got very slightly smaller. Because that wasn't what he wanted. Obviously, if I walked out willingly with my son in my arms, there was no incident, no resistance, no casus belli, just an accountant and a maid and a boy walking up a ramp. He needed the ring cow to move. So he said, unfortunately there's a processing sequence. The minor transits first. You'd follow on the next rotation. 12, maybe 14 days. 14 days. He wanted to put my son on a ship without me for 14 days. And every ring cow on that floor knew exactly what he was doing and exactly why. And Vurek's arm was shaking so hard now, the hammer was making a sound against his belt. I looked past Marrow at Tam. He was sitting on his stool with his braces hanging down and his eyes were huge, and he was doing the thing he does when he's scared, which is get very, very still and very, very quiet, because in a hold full of predators the smallest thing survives by not moving. 7 years old. He looked at me and he mouthed one word. Ma. Something happened in my chest. I've tried to describe it 100 times and I can't. It's not courage. Courage is a decision. This wasn't a decision. This was a switch. Something old. Something that predates language, that predates us, that lives down at the bottom of the stack under everything the concordance ever wrote down. I walked across that forge floor. Straight through them, past 2 boarding troopers who could have turned me into a fine mist with one hand, past Marrow, past Vurek, who made a low noise in his throat when I went by. I walked up to my son and I picked him up, braces and all, 28 kilos plus about 9 kilos of scrap metal, and I hoisted him onto my hip like he was 2 years old again, and my back screamed and I did not care. I turned around. And I said no. Marrow sighed. He actually sighed. He rubbed the bridge of his nose. He said, Ms. Ashgrove, please understand. I'm not permitted to negotiate. The instrument is filed. I have no discretion here, truly none. If I could stamp this differently, I would. And I believed him. That's the horror of it. He wasn't lying. He nodded at one of the white suits. And it came for us. Here's what a concordance boarding trooper does when it's told to recover a minor from a non-cooperative guardian. It doesn't hurt you. That's not permitted. There are rules, extensive rules. What it does is deploy a suppression field, a short-range induction pulse that scrambles voluntary motor function for about 8 seconds. Non-lethal, non-injurious, fully compliant. Your muscles just stop listening. You drop whatever you're holding. That's the whole mechanism. That's how they take children from parents in a way that shows up in the record as guardian-released custody. The trooper raised its arm. I saw the emitter ring on its forearm start to glow. And I did the only thing left. I turned my back on it, and I curled my whole body around my son. The pulse hit me between the shoulder blades. I want to tell you what that's like, because I don't think anybody's ever explained it properly, and I think somebody should. It's not pain, it's absence. It's your entire body being unplugged from you while you're still inside it. Every muscle from your neck down just leaves, goes somewhere else, and you're still awake. You're fully, completely awake and aware, and you can feel yourself falling and you cannot do one single thing about it. I felt my arms let go of my son. I felt them let go. Do you understand what I'm telling you? I felt my own arms open. 8 seconds. That's the spec. 8 seconds of motor suppression, then it wears off clean, no damage, no residue. I don't know how long I was down. It felt like a year. I came back all at once, the way you do, everything switching on wrong, hands full of static, mouth full of copper. I was on the deck, on my side. My cheek was on the grating, and I could feel the diamond pattern of it pressing into my face. And Tam was gone from my arms. Not far, a meter. He'd rolled when I dropped him, and he was on his back on the floor of the forge with his braces locked, and one of the white suits was crouching over him, reaching down. And I was 8 seconds behind. So I bit it. I'm not proud. I'm not going to dress it up. I got my hands under me, and I came off that floor, and I did not throw a punch because a punch does absolutely nothing to powered plate. I grabbed the trooper's arm with both hands, and I put my teeth into the gap at the elbow joint, where the plate segments overlap, and I bit down until I felt something give. Not the armor, my tooth. I heard it crack in my own skull, this little dry tick. And I kept biting. The trooper stood up, with me on its arm. It lifted its arm, and I came up with it, off the deck, feet dangling, still attached, and it did the thing they're trained to do, it shook. Once sharp. I hit the forge stanchion 4 meters away. Now, I want to be very careful here, because this is the part everybody gets wrong, and this is the part that ended up in dispatches, and I have listened to people who weren't there describe it, and it makes me want to scream. I did not get up because I'm strong. I'm not strong. I'm 158 centimeters of exhausted single mother with a bad back and a cracked incisor. I got up because of what humans are. I need you to understand something about the rest of the galaxy, and I only understand it myself because I lived 9 kilometers deep in a rock with people who could bench a shuttle. Everything out there is better than us. Faster, stronger, tougher hide, better eyes, better everything. The ring-cow are one of maybe 40 species that could take a human apart barehanded and not breathe hard. But every single one of them has a shutdown. That's the word. Their nervous systems have a governor. When damage crosses a threshold, the body overrules the mind and the animal stops. It's a survival feature. It's why the ring-cow don't fight to the death over food. It's why a concordant suppression pulse works on literally every species in the registry. You hit the governor, the body quits, the fight ends, everyone lives. Humans don't have one. We were built by a planet that tried very hard to eat us, and we came out of it with a nervous system that has no upper limit and no off switch and one instruction, which is keep going until the thing that is happening stops happening. We can override the shutdown with a feeling. There's no word for that in Concordance Standard. There's no word for it in Ring-Cal either. The closest they've got is Sevron-Kai, which translates roughly as the wound that walks, and until that day they thought it was a story. I got up off the floor of that forge. I don't remember doing it. There's a gap. My memory just skips. Vurek told me later. He said I got up in a way that made every ring-cow on the floor take a step back. He said I didn't look angry. He said that's what did it. He said an angry thing they understand. He said I looked patient. The trooper turned, sensor band toward me. And it hesitated. That's on the log. There's a recorded hesitation of 1.4 seconds in the trooper's motor response, and Concordance boarding kit does not hesitate, because it's not the trooper deciding, it's the suit, and the suit is running a threat model. The threat model didn't have a row for what it was looking at. It had just delivered a compliant, non-injurious motor suppression to a Category 4 biological. Category 4 is frail. Category 4 is the tier they use for accountants and children. It had then applied a controlled separation impact well inside safety tolerance. And the Category 4 was standing up, with blood on her teeth, and walking back. Marrow said, and his voice had changed. It had gone up about 1/3 of an octave. Ms. Ashgrove, stop. I didn't stop. He said, you will be injured, this is not. I got to the trooper, and I went past it. Because I didn't want the trooper. I've never wanted the trooper. The trooper is a suit with a person in it following a form. I wanted my son. I got down on the deck and I got my arms under Tam and I picked him up, and my hands were doing something wrong. They were shaking so hard I could barely close them. And I got him up onto my hip and I turned around and I put my back to all 6 of them, and I started walking toward the stair. And the second trooper stepped in front of me. That's when the light went out. I mean that literally. The forge filaments died, all of them at once. 9 kilometers of hold went black in a heartbeat, and there is no dark like the dark inside a moon. There's no sky, no stars, no ambient anything. It's not the absence of light. It's the presence of rock. Somebody's suit lamps kicked on, 2 white cones swinging. And in the middle of the black, from somewhere up in the gantries, where nothing that heavy has any business being, came a sound. I'd never heard it before. I have never heard it since. I hope I never do. It wasn't a roar. Roars are for warnings. Roars mean go away. This was lower than that, under the floor of hearing. I felt it in my sternum and my back teeth, and the cracked one lit up like a flare. It was the sound of something that had stopped warning. They didn't get a shot off. 6 of the most advanced infantry units in the known galaxy, in the finest powered plate the Concordance can build, with sensor suites that can count your heartbeats through a bulkhead. They didn't get one shot off. He came down out of the dark and he took the one that had touched me first, and I'm not going to describe what that looked like because Tam was in my arms, and I turned his face into my shoulder, and I put my hand over his ear, and I'm telling you this story, so I'll tell it the way I choose. It was fast, that's all you get. The second one, he went through the forge tank, straight through. 2 centimeters of ablative steel folded around him like paper around a fist. The third one tried to run. I'll say that again because it deserves saying. Concordance boarding troopers do not run. It's not in them. There's a compliance governor in the suit that won't permit an unauthorized withdrawal. It ran anyway. It overrode. There's a man inside that plate, and somewhere down under all the doctrine and the training and the machine, that man saw what was coming across the forge floor, and his whole ancient animal self stood up and screamed G.O. It made it about 9 meters. Then it was quiet. Just the sound of the reactor thudding somewhere far away, and something dripping and my own breathing, which was too loud, and Tam's little fingers digging into the back of my collar. The lights came up, slow, amber. And Sargon Vess was standing in the middle of the forge floor. He was God. I'd known him for 5 years and I'd never seen him. Not really. I'd seen the Alpha, the coat, the councils, the man who walked through halls. This was the thing under it. He was breathing hard. His shoulders were going. There was a scorch across his ribs where somebody had gotten a shot off after all, and he hadn't noticed. He genuinely hadn't noticed. And his eyes went straight past everything, past the wreckage, past his own people, past Vurek. To Tam. He crossed that floor in about 4 steps. And he stopped in front of us. And I flinched. I want to be honest. Everything I just watched and my body flinched, and I hated myself for it and I couldn't help it. He saw me flinch. And I watched it hit him. I watched 2.5 meters of apex predator with somebody else's blood on his forearms fold a little, right in the middle, because 158-centimeter Maid had flinched. He went down on one knee. Slowly, making it obvious, making himself small or as small as that gets, until his eyes were more or less level with mine. He said, "Give him to me." I said no. I don't know what I was doing. I just watched him do that. I just watched him take 6 of them apart in the dark to keep my son, and I was standing there in front of him with a cracked tooth and blood on my chin saying no, and my arms were locked around my kid so tight he was squirming. Sargon Vess knelt on the floor of his own forge and did not move. He said very quietly, "You are hurt." Your arms are failing. You will drop him again. I will not take him. I am asking to hold him until you can. And that word. Again. You will drop him again. He'd seen it from up in the dark. He'd seen my arms open. I broke right there, completely, in front of 40 people. He took Tam out of my arms like the boy was made of something rare. And Tam, my son, my brave, weird, machine-listening son, who had just watched a massacre through the gap in my collar, reached up and put his hand on the Alpha's throat where the silver comes in, and said, "You're warm." Same as the first time. And Sargon Vess closed his eyes. I saw it. I was right there. He closed his eyes and he put his forehead down against the top of my son's head for about 2 seconds. 2 seconds is nothing. 2 seconds is a breath. 40 Rincal saw it. By nightfall, 9 kilometers of rock knew. Adjutant Marrow was still standing exactly where he'd been standing the whole time. He hadn't moved. He hadn't run. He was holding his slate against his chest with both arms like a schoolboy, and his reading glasses had fallen off somewhere, and there was a wet patch on the front of his very tidy gray suit, and I'm not going to make fun of him for that. I would like to see you do better. Sargon stood up, with my son in the crook of his arm like it was nothing, like he'd been doing it his whole life. He walked over to Marrow. And the accountant looked up and up. And Sargon Vess said, "Read it." Marrow said, "I what?" The instrument, read it aloud. The part about the child. Marrow's hands were shaking so badly, he dropped the slate twice. He read it, out loud. In that forge in the red going amber light, standing in the wreckage of 6 of his own troopers, a middle-aged man with no glasses read 4 paragraphs of concordance statute in a voice that cracked twice. And when he finished, Sargon said, "Now look at him." Marrow looked at Tam. Tam looked back, 7 years old, face still wet, braces squeaking a little as his leg dangled. And Sargon Vess said the thing I will hear in my head until the day I'm ash. "You wrote 400 pages. Not one of them has ever met him." They let Marrow go. I know. Believe me, there were opinions about that. Vurek made his opinion known at some length and in some detail. But Sargon let him go, and he did it for a reason, and the reason was this. He put Marrow on his own ship, alone with the bodies. And he sent, on an open braid-wide channel, unencrypted, so that every clan and every freehold and every concordance listening post from here to the core received it simultaneously, a single line. Not a threat, not a declaration. He sent the log. The whole thing, the forge cams, all of it. Marrow's speech, word for word, the trooper's arm coming up, my back turning, the 8 seconds. And then the part where I got up. Do you understand what that did? The concordance runs on a story. The story is that they're civilization, that they're the alternative to the dark. That out here on the braid there are warlords in caves, and in the core, there are hospitals and schools and rules. And they were right. That's the thing. I keep saying it and nobody wants to hear it. Marrow was right about the pediatric neurology. He was right about the braces. I built those braces out of scrap and love and 11 months of ruined hands, and they were a stopgap, and I knew it every single night I worked on them. But the log went out, and 40 billion people watched a suit with no face take a child off the floor, while his mother's own arms opened against her will. And then they watched her stand up. The clause was repealed in 11 weeks. Not because of us, let's be clear. Nothing happens in 11 weeks because of a maid on a rock. It was repealed because it had become expensive, because 9 holds on the braid had used the log as a recruitment reel, because a subcommittee somewhere decided the optics were unsustainable. Marrow testified. He didn't have to, he'd been cleared. It was a lawful action, correctly filed, and the deaths were on Kellam Deep's ledger, not his. He testified anyway. I've read the transcript maybe 30 times. There's one part where a counselor asks him whether he believes the operation was, on balance, in the child's best interest. And there's a gap in the record, 14 seconds of nothing. And then Adjutant Merrill says, "I have been doing this for 26 years. I have recovered 411 minors. I have never seen a parent get up." And the counselor says, "I'm sorry, get up." And Merrill says, "You'd have to have been there. There's a thing I have to tell you, and then I'm done." 3 weeks after the forge, Sergeant Vess came to the servant tier. Level 6, down the narrow corridor where he had to turn sideways at the junctions, past the laundry, past 11 doors. He knocked on mine. The Alpha of Kellam deep knocked. I opened it and he was standing there in the hall like an idiot, filling it wall to wall, ears at that flat that isn't anger, and he had something in his hands. "A crate." I said, "What is it?" He said, "Open it." Inside was a leg brace. Not scrap, not salvage, nothing I could have built in 11 months or 11 years. Warship gimbal alloy, myoelectric lattice, hip harness cut from the same hide weave they use for command coats, and the whole thing was black and silver. The clan colors. I looked up at him. And I said, "You can't." Because he couldn't. Ringcal law is not a suggestion. You don't put clan colors on an outsider. There's no clause for it. There's no path. 400 years of it and no path. And Sergeant Vess said, "It is not clan colors, it is paint." I said, "Sargon." And he said, and I swear his voice did something, it dropped. It went somewhere I'd never heard it go. "Then let them come and take the paint off him." Nobody came. Tam's 14 now. The disease is still there. It doesn't go away. There's no cure. And yes, there's a hospital in the Corps with excellent pediatric neurology, and no, we didn't go, and I've made peace with that on maybe half the night since. But he walks. He walks the whole 9 kilometers if he wants to. He runs, badly, laughing, with a hitch in it, and Bones has a name now that isn't Bones. He calls it something in Ringcal that doesn't translate and that Vurek taught him, and that makes the whole forge floor go quiet with something when he says it. He works for Vurek now. Apprentice, 3rd year. The old bastard says he's got hands like a drunk and an ear like a god. And Sargon. I'm not going to tell you about that. Not tonight. Some of it isn't a story yet. Some of it is just my life, and I've given away enough of it already. But I'll tell you one thing. Last month at the Winter Council, 12 alphas in the Great Hall, the whole braid watching, treaties on the table, my son walked in late, squeaking, right through the middle of it, because he'd forgotten his slate and it was on the war table and he needed it, and he's 14 and 14-year-olds do not understand geopolitics. 12 alphas turned around. And Sargon Vess put his hand up and stopped the entire council. For 11 seconds, while a limping human boy in black and silver braces walked across the floor, got his slate, said sorry, and walked back out. Nobody said a word. Because there isn't a word. People ask me what changed him. They always ask it like that, like he was one thing and became another. He didn't change. He was always that. All of it. The dark, the gantry, the sound under the floor of hearing, that was always in him, and it would have stayed in him and died in him, buried 9 kilometers deep under a mountain he chose to carry. He didn't need to be changed. He needed someone small enough, and stupid enough, and warm enough, to walk up to the most dangerous thing in 9 systems, put a hand on his leg and say you're warm. I was just the alpha's maid. I mopped his floors for 5 years, and he never learned my name. But I'll tell you what I know now that I didn't know then, and it's the only thing I've got that's worth passing on. Every monster in this galaxy is somebody who was never touched gently. And every one of them is waiting.